Questions I get all the time, I've been getting for many years, is in the speaking business, is what's the fastest way to build a business in speaking from $0 to $1 million in revenue? And the reason I get asked the question is for about 10 years or so, I was the fastest person in the National Speakers Association, according to what people told me, that ever did that. And then I was overtaken by one of the Bill Gove, a fellow Bill Gove graduate, Vernice Armour, who did it faster. And I did it in 5 years. She did it in 4 years from zero. So what's the secret to it? Well, I'll tell you what I did and what a lot of people do that don't talk about this at meetings at National Speakers Association or any other speakers meetings. Sometimes they do, but it's very rarely discussed. I don't know exactly why. It's not any big secret, but if there's any kind of a secret, just like in any other business, you can build a business in linear fashion. You can kick and scratch and fight and work your way, like they say, the old saying, pull yourself up from your bootstraps. Overrated. Almost no one. I've been interviewing rich people, billionaires, multimillionaires for almost 40 years now, which is funny because I'm only 22 years old, which is really kind of doesn't work math-wise. But anyway, a long time, my whole adult life. And what you learn when you interview super rich people around the world for 40 years is almost none of them took a linear path. That doesn't mean they cheated. It just means they had a better system. They had an unfair advantage of some kind. And that's what I did, and that's what some people do in the speaking business that don't talk about it. So I want to talk about mine, and I highly recommend this to you, this strategy, because it's very, very smart if you can make it work. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. I'll talk about that very quickly as well, because that is a factor. So you can't always make this work. But if you can, this is one of the great secrets, if you want to call it a secret, and that's licensing. In other words, licensing someone else's intellectual property that has been extremely successful, in this case at the 7-figure level. Because if you want to make $1 million a year or more as fast as possible, then you're going to need a process or a program or intellectual property that has produced certainly at least tens of millions of dollars over the years, right? So what does that get you? Well, I'll tell you what it got me. So I had this opportunity back in 2001 to buy an intellectual property license with a track record, with a seminar track record of, tons and tons of worldwide success and people that had gone through this program and had been unbelievably successful. And so it was expensive. I didn't really have the money. I was just starting out in the speaking business. And so I called Larry Wilson, the most successful corporate speaker that ever got into this business. Wilson Learning, it's in 86 countries around the world to this day. They have offices in 86 countries. It's unbelievable. Larry Wilson was Dr. Abraham Maslow's, if you don't know this, protege. Okay, at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this was his protege, Larry Wilson, a genius in his own right. And Larry was my mentor for the last 15 years of his life. And so I called Larry and I said, look, I don't really have the money to license this intellectual property. Why couldn't I just do this on my own and just kind of, scratch it out from the start like most people do? He said, Steve, you're not buying content. You are buying content to some degree, a package. He said, but way more important than content, when you buy the right intellectual property license, what you're buying is a track record of success. He said, Steve, it would take you 50 years of your life to equal, if you even had a chance, which it's unlikely you do, 50 years to get the track record, the testimonials, the success stories that you're purchasing with this license. So long story short, I wrote the check. He goes, you write the check, you have all of this track record behind you. I wrote the check. I didn't really have the money. I had to get a loan on the money. So I took it, and this was a royalty-based intellectual property license, okay? Which is a whole other story for a whole other video. And if you're interested in that, I can walk you through that another time. But bottom line is royalty-based licenses are like franchises. They're very, very expensive. So I'll just give you the long and the short of it so this video is not too long. Over the last roughly 22 years, it cost me with royalties about $500,000. That's royalties over 22 years with royalties, about 500 grand, not in one shot, but over time. Okay, but we did the numbers recently on what we've earned from that intellectual property license, and the numbers come out to be roughly $9.3 million in sales, in revenue. So we paid $500,000 over 22 years, okay, with royalties and upfront money, and we earned roughly $9.3 million. So, that's obviously, an almost 20x, if my math is right, not quite, but almost 20x investment over a period of time. So obviously that was well worth the license. Doesn't mean that's going to happen to you, but it's a fast track. I made money the first year on that license. First year. And that I made over what I paid. I paid the loan back, and then I made a pretty healthy profit. Nothing crazy, but like almost a couple $100,000, which to me in the beginning of the business was a lot of money. It is a lot of money anyway. But but then of course we went on to make quite a bit more over a period of time. The point is this: if you can find, and they're not always easy to find, okay, an intellectual property license that fits what you want to talk about, the problem you want to solve, the solutions you want to offer for organizations that you want to speak to, it's worth its weight in gold. It will fast track you like nothing else can, because it's already done. It's already cooked. It's like a franchise, like buying a McDonald's franchise. You don't have to go out and tell people, hey, McDonald's is a really good hamburger. You ought to try them out. Like everyone in the world is eating a McDonald's hamburger. It's not quite at that level, but it's the same concept that it's already proven. There's testimonials all over the world. There's people who have succeeded and will back you up, on video, on audio, and you just wrote a check. You may have never, uttered a word about this content before, but you purchased it. It's the smartest thing you can possibly do. The only downside to it is if it's not a good contract, okay, if it's an unfair contract where you're paying ridiculous royalties, I'm not crazy about McDonald's franchise contract. I'm not crazy about Subway's contract. Okay, it's a franchise, but licensing is a spin-off basically of franchising, essentially. And so there are bad contracts. That is one downside. You got to make sure you get a good contract. Make sure you're not paying over too much in royalty fees. In other words, you got to make sure they don't hamstring you too much in terms of what you can and can't do, how you can promote it, and that kind of thing. That said, if you get a good one, you will fast track yourself. It is the fastest way to go from 0 to $1 million. That's how I did it. People used to ask me all the time, how did you come out of nowhere and go to $1 million in revenue that fast? I mean, I was like 37 years old when I was at $1 million in speaking, which, at that time was the fastest one in NSA, or that's what people told me. And so it's certainly fast, even if there are other people that eventually caught up to that. It is pretty fast. The reason is the license. I had the license, and I played off the credibility and the track record of the license. I bought credibility. I bought intellectual property. I didn't have to earn it for years and years and years. Okay? Now, on the flip side of this, my flagship program that I started, the reason I started speaking is to run Mental Toughness University, which I've done for, many, many years. I had to develop that program over a period of years. Failure after failure after failure. I went from professional athletes and Olympic athletes to Fortune 500 companies like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Microsoft, GlaxoSmithKline, Merck Pharmaceutical, on and on and on. And I had to customize. And it didn't, when you go from professional sports teams and athletes, great athletes, to salespeople, it does not. It's like going from Spanish to Italian. It's not quite, you can't, one word there's not always a word in Italian that's in Spanish and vice versa, right? It's the same. So you have to customize things, and you fail, and then it doesn't work, and it breaks down, you lose the contract. It took me, a good 5 to 7, 8 years to really get that thing down where it was really, making a fair amount of money. And now I license that program, but it took me years to do that. I would never, ever do that again. I did it because I couldn't find a good mental toughness, psychological performance license. I tried. I just couldn't find one that I agreed with, that I liked. So there were some out there. I just didn't like them, and I still don't to this day, frankly. And the program's done well, and it was worth it. But would I do it again and spend all those years doing that? No, it's stupid. If it's not stupid if you can't find a license, but if you can find the license, buy it. Just pay for it. Because you're buying years of trial and error. You're just erasing all those years of trial and error and going right to success. It's the smartest thing you can do. Again, not always possible, but if you can do it, that is the number one, by far, fast track, except for celebrity. If you become the most famous person in the country or something, okay, that might be faster. So I'll give that, with that caveat, I'll say that for the rest of us mere mortals who are not celebrities, okay, it's the fastest way to go from 0 to $1 million and beyond. Licensing, worth its weight in gold.